In June, the Supreme Court handed down several major decisions. Many conservatives say Justices Roberts and Barrett have joined the three liberal judges too often. We'll discuss some of those decisions and the court's conservative track record with Kelly Shackelford. He was named one of the top 25 lawyers in Texas for the last quarter century. Next on Lieutenant Dan. Kelly Shackelford is president and CEO of First Liberty Institute. He is a constitutional scholar who graduated at the top of his class at Baylor Law School and has argued before the Supreme Court many times and has won several major cases. I've known Kelly for many years. He's one of the most respected lawyers in Texas. I recommended to the president that he appoint Kelly to our Presidential Commission on Religious Liberty. The president did, and Kelly played a key role. I'm glad you're with us. Let's go behind the headlines. Kelly, thanks for joining us today. You know, before we get into the Supreme Court, and I want to get into some of these decisions, I'm looking at your record before the Supreme Court. You've had 11 cases in 8 years, and you are 11-0. What's the secret of getting the Supreme Court to agree with you?
I wish I could say it's just that we're brilliant, but I just got to say it's God's favor. Obviously Trump's putting really good people on the court has made things a little easier. I've been doing this for 37 years, and we've got a better court on religious freedom, which is what I do, than we've ever had. And it's really just a watershed time for religious freedom. We're starting to really open up religious freedom. And so we've been very fortunate to have the right cases at the right time with the right justices. And the great thing about it, Dan, is they're not just like 11 wins at the Supreme Court. They're some of the biggest, most major precedent-changing cases in maybe the last 100 years. Coach Kennedy and Carson and Groff and a number of these cases just shifted the law in a great way for freedom. So it's been a fun time, but my belief is we're just at the beginning. We're gonna keep doing it, and we've got more to come ahead.
And we're going to talk, because we're doing 2 episodes with you, we're going to talk about those specific cases in another episode. But I do want to ask you this question about these recent Supreme Court decisions. And that is, a lot of conservatives are upset by some of these decisions. And what I hear often is, if it were a 6-3 Democrat-controlled court, the 3 Democrats would never, ever join with 3 Republicans. They would never cross over. And so Roberts and Barrett are kind of in the middle of that most of the time. Do you think if the Democrats had a 6-3 majority, they would ever move over and support the Republicans?
No, there's a major difference between the 2 parties when it comes to judges. I remember being at one of the confirmation hearings, one of the reporters, and I had to explain this to the reporter because they just thought it was just politics, right? The Democrats put people in the court who will push through liberal policies, and the conservatives, when they're on the court, they'll push through conservative policies. It's not true. The judicial philosophy is different. The Democrats think that their job is to it's a living, breathing constitution. They just need to do what they think is good for the country. Whereas the conservatives think they're actually supposed to follow whatever the words of the statute or the Constitution say, and what is the original meaning. And even if it's a policy they don't like, they still think that's what they're supposed to do. And so that creates different results where you'll have conservatives join with more traditional liberals because they're following what they feel like the statute is saying and what the original meaning of the text was. The amazing thing to me, Dan, is that for the first time, really, in the last few years, for the first time in the history of our country, I would say, we have a majority of justices who think their job is to find the original meaning of the text. And that's why we're seeing so many changes in a lot of these decisions from the past, is they're going to what the Constitution says and what the statute says. Now, they might disagree, the conservatives, but at least that's their guiding principle of what they're trying to do, which is very different from what the Democrats did when they had control.
So, Kelly, if I look back at 2016 and the first election when President Trump defeated Hillary Clinton, I've always said that the reason the left hates him so much is it takes three actions to take over a country. One, you have to take over the education system, which the left has done over 40 years, in large part in the public education system, both K through 12 and higher ed. And then you have to take over the propaganda arm, which is the mainstream media, which has fallen almost, with the exception of Fox and a few other outlets, under the spell of the Democrats. And then the third thing you have to do is take over the courts. And they were so sure that Hillary Clinton would beat Donald Trump. They thought they had the trifecta or the hat trick. They thought they had it. And the fact that they lost it, one of the reasons they don't like her anymore within their party, it's one of the things I think that they really hate Trump for, because he spoiled this leftist radical plan that I don't think a lot of people in this country have realized, that the communist and socialist movement has been afoot for 50 years. It hasn't gone away. And we see it now in full bloom. I mean, they're electing communists and Democrat socialists. So when you look back at that, had Hillary won, and if we had a 7-2 or 6-3 court now with liberals, we would be losing all of our rights, from the First Amendment to, to religious liberty, to freedom of speech, to the Second Amendment. We would have lost all of this.
There's no doubt. And if you remember back to the first time Trump was elected, the largest group that voted for Trump that made the difference were the evangelicals. It was just a huge percentage. And the number one, if you looked at the polling, the number one reason they voted for Trump was the Scalia seat. They were literally focused on the judges. They realized that, this is what it was about. And then, of course, to everybody's surprise, he got a chance to put 3 justices on the court. Think about it, when he ran for office, he wouldn't even been allowed on the ballot in all these states if the liberals had control. They wouldn't even we could have a revolution at this point, because, when you start telling people they can't vote for one of the candidates, you're asking for, a revolution. And so it's really important that we have judges and justices who believe in the rule of law. And I'll tell you, Dan, that we're seeing, I don't know if you're watching this, we send this out with our email alert every week, but the court packing language on the left is through the roof. And anybody who studied this and knows what happens when you court pack, your country is over, because the rule of law is over. You just think whoever has political power can put whatever justices they on. So whatever rights you think you have, you don't, because they can just add justices until they take that away. That's how South American countries, that's how a number of countries around the world have lost, really all of their freedoms. That's what will happen if that ever happens here. It really should be something no conservative, no liberal wants, because their freedoms are gone the first moment that happens. But that's how radical this attempt is. They say, if we get power, if we get the House, the Senate, and the presidency, we want to add 5, 10, 15 justices. Really, really horribly thought through, and a disaster, which I hope we never experience. We're doing all we can to educate people of what a bad idea that is, no matter what side of the aisle you're on.
So when we talk about how the Democrats have a different view of the courts, of the justices they appoint to the Supreme Court and to lower courts, which are very critical as well, that have the cases before they get appealed to the Supreme Court, when did that shift happen?
Really, I would say, go back to the 1960s, when we had the upheaval that was going on in our country. And I always say, people would ask me, like in a church, they'd ask me, well, why are the justices just kind of making things up? Why are they saying it's a living constitution and they're just adding their own thoughts in here? And I would look at them and I'd say, well, how many pastors are doing that with the Bible? And I just think that...
Well, say that again, Kelly. Wait a minute. I want you to say that again. I want that to sink in.
I said that it's really no different from the pastors who are reading the Bible as a living thing, where they can just add in concepts, words that aren't there, interpreting whatever way they want to. So why should it surprise you if pastors are doing that with the Bible, that justices are doing it with the Constitution? It's sort of, when we got moved in this country towards what I would call sort of evolutionary truth, where your truth is my truth. There is no truth, and you just kind of go where you want to go. That's going to affect not only what the pastor said, it's going to affect what the judges say. And so we had this whole many decades, 50 years or so, of the Constitution is a living, breathing document. And again, well-intentioned by those people, although their philosophy was wrong, they felt like their job on the court was to just kind of make things more modern and put good values in that. And really what they're doing is acting like a legislature. But they're not acting like a judge when they do that. But, it's very tempting for a judge when they have the power to, quote, do good, to withhold from doing good. But Justice Thomas is a great example of somebody who says, it's not about whether I like the result. It's about what the law says. And I'm gonna interpret that. I'm gonna follow what the original meaning is. And if somebody wants to change it, that's the legislature's job. That is not the court's job. We don't want 5 people in a back room setting our national public policy. We want people that are responsible, like in Congress every 2 years in the House, to the people making those policy decisions, where the people can participate in those policy decisions. But we didn't have that for a long time on the Supreme Court, and it's where all these cases, the Roe v. Wade's, all these things came from. It was all during that 60s and 70s and all that time when our country was in an upheaval, and really everything, all authority was being challenged, and the idea of sort of the rule of law and going by what the original meaning of the text is was kind of old hat, and they just started pushing what they thought was good. But we're beyond that now. We've got a court that, again, I'm not saying you agree with everything, even the conservatives say if you're a conservative, but they are trying to find the original meaning of the text. That's their goal, and they disagree with people, with each other at times when they're in that process.
Let me then go back to these recent decisions that they've just handed down in June. So we see the 6, I don't want to say ours, but appointed by a Republican president, the 6, and you see this big difference, say on birthright citizenship, between Barrett and Roberts. Is that because when they were selected, they weren't the right people to select? That they didn't have that history and that background, and that they just have a different view than Justice Thomas and Gorsuch and the others on the court who tend to stand together?
Well, you've got to realize, people forget this. When Trump put, Amy Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh and these folks on the court, he had a 51-49 Senate. I mean, that's a really tight Senate. And when you count amongst the 51,
yes,
like Flake and Murkowski
Collins.
and Collins, I mean, who you might not can get through a Clarence Thomas type person. So that was all in his calculation of who's the strongest person he can get through. He definitely has not, and I hope he gets another chance. I think Trump should have a chance to put a Trump judge, an Alito type judge, a Scalia type judge, a Thomas type judge, but he hadn't had that chance really yet because he hasn't had a Senate that had enough room for him to push somebody really solid through. And that's why you get, kind of flip. There's kind of a 3-3-3 is what most people feel. There's kind of 3 that are more strongly conservative. You've got Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch most of the time. And then you've got Kavanaugh and the Chief Justice Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett, and then you got the 3 liberals. And so you've got this mix of decisions that occur, and birthright citizenship was one of them. The shocking thing to me, Dan, as just a lawyer, a technical person on the Supreme Court, was there was no reason for the court to get to the constitutionality of this at all. There is a statute that's in place that put into the statute, this is by Congress, because of a bad decision called Wong Kim Ark, and they said that if you're born in the United States, then you're a citizen, as long as you're not like an ambassador's child or whatever. That's what the statute put into place. And so it was like they really wanted to get to the Constitution and take this issue off the table. And that's not what courts are supposed to do. Kavanaugh wrote in his opinion where he said, hey, look, you can change statutes and change the citizenship thing around. He said, why in the world would they reach the constitutionality when all we need to do is deal with the statute? It says what, a lot of the conservatives don't want it to say, and just change the statute. So I was really surprised. A lot of scholars were surprised that the court jumped over the issue they should have determined to get to the Constitution and lay this opinion out. And look, when you get into that, it gets more complicated, because I would say this, Dan, for listeners, there's a difference between public policy, what you would want the law to read, and if you're being faithful to what it says, right? I mean, this is horrible public policy. The idea that people fly in here, that people come illegally, and I mean, the founders were, in the 14th Amendment, when they were passing that, they were thinking about slaves being citizens. They weren't thinking about this issue of what we're dealing with now. And so it's horrible public policy. I mean, we have people from China that can, fly into the United States and have kids here and then go back. I wouldn't think many Americans would vote in favor of that as public policy. But when you have to get to what the law says, you can have conservatives that will disagree about what it actually says. They might all agree you should change it, but they might interpret what it really says and what they were doing at the time, and that leads to these fractured decisions.
So what's the next path to revisit that issue now on birthright citizenship? Because I agree with you, Kelly, this makes absolutely no sense. People coming here differently than they came here 100 years ago or 125 or 150 years ago. They came to embrace America. They came to work hard, not live off the government. They came because they wanted to be an American citizen. And Kelly, it's interesting, and these podcasts stay up on the web forever, as you know. So years from now, people will look back at the World Cup and say, when was that? But for now, the World Cup has exposed the greatness of America to people all over the world that would want to make them come here. And a lot of young men, or the soccer fans are coming here. They would want to come in here. They can't. They're shocked at what they're seeing and feeling, and the kindness of Americans, and all the opportunities and the variety of things they can do and buy, and the size of homes that people have, and what the suburbs look like to anywhere in most of Europe. And these are the people who would come here and want to be part of America, as opposed to the 15 million or whatever the final number is, we'll never know exactly, that Biden let in, that may have a totally different agenda. And based on this decision by the Supreme Court, our enemies can flood the zone. I read a comment. What stops a terrorist from coming here just to have as many children as they could have and bringing them up, or a cartel? They have children here, and now they have a different view of this country, and it's just I think the court, and I want you to talk about some of these decisions. They made some really good decisions this time that President Trump wanted, but on this one and a few others, it was hard to understand their decision. The Republicans.
I tell you what, you'll be excited to know, because most people aren't aware of this. There actually is an answer to this. It's already out there, and it's really being highlighted by Texans. There's a federal court of appeals judge by the name of Judge Jim Ho, who in a decision specifically under the law and the Constitution said this is an invasion. What happened was an invasion. Scholars have written, including Josh Blackman, who's a great law professor in Texas, have written that if it's an invasion, then none of those people are citizens. Because you think about it, think of it, if some army came in and they had children while they're here, they're not citizens. Everybody agrees on that. So if that happens in the court, if they determine that this is an invasion, those people are not citizens. You don't have to change the law. You don't have to change the Constitution. It's, you've won on that issue that you were trying to win on. So I will say this, there is an answer out there. It's in some of the decisions already. It's not at the Supreme Court yet. Senator Cruz wrote a law review article, I think a few months ago, where he highlighted this and pointed out that this is really the answer to this invasion we had over 4 years, where we were flooded in our country, and then these people are having children and calling them citizens. So I'll say that. There is an answer. I mean, the real answer, we wish it would be that Congress would go in and change the law, that, that they would actually change the Constitution to make clear what the founders, would have never intended to happen. But we all know it's going to get clogged up there. They can't seem to pass anything. That's why it's wonderful that there is actually a decision and a legal process that's out there that maybe can be taken advantage of and get around this case and deal with the issue.
Well, for a long time, since I first joined the legislature in 2007, I've been calling it an invasion. And every time that I would use that word, the media would just attack me. And it was clear it was an invasion. And it's clear that this was a plan by the left and the Democrats. And it's clear that they used auto pen Joe Biden as just a pawn that they could push around and do. I've always believed that Obama has been, basically, he has violated the Constitution because he's served a third term. I think he was behind the entire administration, or at least his people were, with his guidance. And so this was the plan. They knew it would be difficult to remove the people. Secondly, they thought they would win again, and so they'd have another 4 more years to do it. But it's the biggest threat to the future of our country and to our children and our grandchildren to let anyone come in here and become a citizen in the wrong way. Of course, we're a country of migrants. We want legal immigration to come here, and we welcome people who want to embrace our country. But we're in a dangerous spot. And then you have the second issue of open communism right now, which is on the march. I mean, we're seeing it in small cities, mid-sized towns, and big cities, and the Democrats are holding back. I think they will pay the price in November, but we'll see. Let me go back to some of the decisions. So we talked about the birthright citizenship. Talk about a few of the good decisions. I know you and I have talked about it, that you thought were really strong, and the courts not only stood for Trump, but they stood for the Constitution.
Yeah, if you look at the Trump court, and you look at his appointments and what they've done, as I mentioned earlier, because their philosophy is different, it's not pushing what they want. It's actually going to what the original meaning of the text in the Constitution is. I think the Democrats have made and the left has made some horrible mistakes. They've begun filing all these lawsuits, of course, when Trump got back in. And they did it in like Boston and D.C. and these places where they get these judges who are going to do crazy stuff. But then that just means it's going to get appealed, and it's going to get up to the Supreme Court. And there were a number of doctrines that were cases that I think many of us thought were wrong, and thought that if this Supreme Court looked at them and the original meaning of the text, they would overturn them. But they were really important, helpful decisions in the past to the left. Not tying the hands of the president to not even fire somebody in his own, executive branch. The kind of stuff that I think most Americans are like, what? You're the CEO and you can't fire a bad employee? Or you can't, this is crazy. You can't run an entity and not have the ability to hold people accountable. And we've seen these cases now really flip things. If you look, the Chevron deference, I don't want to get too technical.
But no, explain it.
The Chevron deference, yes. Well, it was a doctrine that was put in place by the court that said, look, whenever there's an ambiguity about a federal regulation, we're going to defer to the experts in the federal government. So guess what? Whether it's the EPA or whoever, the businesses always lose. So, it was a massive power into the deep state. But in Loper, that was overturned. The Supreme Court overturned that. You talk about a shift of power away from the government, the federal government, into the hands of regular people and businesses. That was a huge one. This term, the Slaughter case, which it was about the FTC and whether the president has authority to hire and fire and do that. And again, what they had said, there's this old precedent called Humphrey's Executor. And it had been used to say, well, we know these are in the executive branch, but they kind of have a legislative function, and so the president really can't just do what he wants with those employees. And the Supreme Court, just this term, said, no, Humphrey's Executor out of here. Whatever was left of it, we've been picking away at it. It's gone. This is the executive branch. The Constitution specifically says that the president is the one with all power over the executive branch, not the Congress, not somebody else. It's the president. And so that is restoring all this power and accountability. Again, he can't go outside of the executive branch or violate the Constitution, but when it comes to their own employees, you need to be able to shape your own employees, your own approach, your own policy, so that you can follow what the country elected you to do in the executive branch. Bound by the Constitution, but free to do all these things. They have tried to tie his hands over and over, but they went too far, and they really now took all this protection that was there for all these liberal deep state people that were hiding in the caverns and waiting until the Democrat comes back and trying to throw tacks in the road for the president. They figure they can get away from him. What can he do to them? Well, these court cases are restoring that power back to the president to where they can't do that. The deep state can't stay and hide. They can't get away with these things. So really big. Of course, Dobbs case on Roe v. Wade. I mean, we could go through a bunch of these, some really
boys
huge
playing
religious
girls
liberty
sports
cases. Yes, these are big victories that are really significant. And it's kind of common for all of us, right? If they do 10 good things, but they do 1 or 2 bad, we're going to focus on the bad,
yes.
The ones we don't like. But overall, I mean, the reason the left is wanting to pack the court and just totally politicize and take over the court if they get power is what the court has been doing is going back to the Constitution, what it says, and really taking the authority and the power of the deep state and these people who aren't elected away and putting it in the hands of the people. Think of the Dobbs case. People want to make it about abortion, I understand. It's really about who has the power. Does the federal government, does 5 people in the Supreme Court force their belief about life and abortion on the whole country? Or is it up to the people to make that decision, that policy decision? So if you see what's going on in a lot of these cases, it's putting the power ultimately back in the hands of the people. And if we're bad people, we're going to have a bad government. And if we're good people, we'll have a good government. I mean, it's kind of what our founders said, right? I mean, without morality and religion, this country doesn't work. And that's what the court is doing. It's going back to what the founders said, what the Constitution says.
Kelly, as we wrap up here, going back to the transgender issue, and look, I was proud that in 2017 it was one of my priority bills to keep men out of ladies' rooms and boys out of girls' showers in schools and address the sports issue. Lois Colcourse carried that bill for me. We got beat up really badly, threatened. Her children paid a price in school. Corporate America came down against me. The bathroom bill. That's what they labeled it. And finally, we passed it every time in the Texas Senate. We finally got it through the House this time with a new speaker, and we stopped it in Texas. But if you read what the blue states are saying today, the blue state governors are saying, we're going to ignore this Supreme Court ruling, and we're going to allow boys to play girls' sports. So we'll wrap up this episode. Explain that, how the states can go against the Supreme Court decision, and is it just a matter of time for more lawsuits to be filed that they will lose, but they're playing the delay game and continuing it?
I would say there's 2 answers to that. Sometimes states the decision might not tie their hands in every situation, and so they're going to take advantage of those situations that are open. But if they do anything to go against the decision, they're going to get whacked in court. They're going to lose, especially on a Supreme Court decision that's so strong. What that Supreme Court decision was really looking at is federal laws we have, which protect women in sports, to make sure that they have their own sports programs. You've got Title IX and the different things that are out there. And they said this nonsense interpretation that a man is a woman if he thinks he's a woman, no, not going to get anywhere here. So that protection is there and that interpretation is there at the very top court. And any who try to violate the decision are going to have a problem. Although there is leeway. Like I said, this court has not created things that aren't in the law. They've left it up to the people. So it's the people who ultimately pass Title IX. It's the people who pass these laws in the state. But you've got a really strong decision now that's going to affect all those laws in the future, whether it's a bathroom law or anything else. There's going to be implications and there's going to be more litigation to have to go through this because of these blue states.
Yeah. Well, and one of those potential loopholes is that a number of blue states allow you to go back and change your birth certificate. Allow you to change your birth certificate. Now, we don't allow that in Texas and a few other states. Florida doesn't allow it. But there are a few states that do not allow you to go back. I remember since I've been lieutenant governor for the last 10 years, we have fought on so many of these issues, and we often say that as Texas goes, so goes America. And of course, you're a Texan, so you not only are you doing your work before the Supreme Court in Washington, but this is your home, and so you're on top of all of these things as well. I think it shows the importance of elections, because these issues, the Democrats, in the Texas Senate and the Texas House still fight against them, and we keep pushing them. And Texas does lead on these issues, and I'm proud that we lead. And have a great Senate, and we have a conservative, I'd say the most conservative House we've had in leadership since I've been around for 20 years. So we are making headway on that. But it was easy for us to say, no, you can't go back and change your birth certificate. And the fact that you have most of the states in America allow you to do that is how they can get around those things. Kelly, this has been fascinating. We could do another hour. I don't know how long we've been going, but it's been fascinating. And we're going to do, as I mentioned, we're going to do another episode with you on religious liberty, because you were the first lawyer, that when I asked President Trump if we could do this commission, I said, I want Kelly Shackelford on the committee, because I need historians, I need lawyers, I need pastors. And so he said, absolutely. And we had a very pleasant discussion with the president 2 weeks ago, you and myself in the Oval Office with him and Paula White, and about a number of things. But I just want the viewers and listeners to understand, I had you on my right. I told you that. I said, Kelly, I'm putting you next to me because I'm not a lawyer. I had Ben Carson on my left for wisdom. So I had constitutional knowledge to my right and great wisdom on my left. I couldn't go wrong. And you really helped us with that entire commission, and we're going to do an episode on that. But thank you for joining us and going into this great detail. I think it's just eye-opening for people. Lastly, getting to your point, that even though these big decisions like birthright citizenship didn't go our way and a few others didn't go our way, the data appears that since Trump has been president and had his court in place, that he has done better than most presidents in terms of having decisions go his way. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah.
Based on the data? Yeah,
and I mean, just because the people he picked, the philosophy they have, I don't think they care whether it's for Trump or against Trump. Right. But he picked people who actually want to follow the Constitution and not push their own values, and that's huge. And I'll say this, Dan, you've never been scared to say the right thing in Texas. You've been a leader, as you say, even when corporations or other people are attacking you, and that's Trump. And I think of the issue you just talked about with no men and women's sports. I mean, Texans are not for that, no. But boy, you wouldn't know that. All the elites were coming after you like you were, a guy that needed to be disposed of because you took the position that most Texans did. And look at what happens when people show leadership and courage. If you look at what you did, if you look at what the president did on that issue, now corporations don't go there.
Right. They don't go there.
Now, I mean, the whole country's at it. It just took some people with courage to stand up and say what so many others already knew, but nobody had the courage to say. So thank you for your leadership, and I'm very thankful for the president and his leadership on these big moral issues like that, where he said, oh, come on, this is wrong. Right. And a lot of little girls and a lot of young ladies their whole future got changed by this, because they were stealing all their scholarships, their state records, everything. And it would have happened if people weren't courageous enough to stand up and say, no, 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 this is wrong. So thank you for that.
Yeah, Kelly, I can remember talking to a sports owner, and because they didn't like the quote bathroom bill. And I just said, well, tell me, in the upper deck where your fans are, I say, if a man goes into a ladies' room after some fan has had a couple of beers, or even if they didn't, and they go in there and find a guy in the ladies' room, that's not going to turn out very well for that guy. So is that what you want? Well, we don't allow that. So why are you fighting the bill? And then I talked to a corporate CEO, and I said, he said, Dan, you've got to drop this. This is hurting us. And I said, wait a minute. In your corporate suite, in your executive offices, do you allow men to go in the ladies' room? End of story. And of course they didn't. What the people didn't realize, and finally the people did, look, I had some Republican supporters who said, Dan, why are you pressing this issue? And, if someone's, and back then transition didn't mean like it as much as it does today, and it's so common. But I said, it opens the door for any pervert to go into any ladies' room at any time and claim, hey, I have a right to be here. And it made, I think people started waking up like, I hadn't thought of that. And I remember Lois Colcourse and I, Senator Colcourse, we had a discussion with the NCAA and told them, this is going to bring you down. And they blew us off, almost pretty much hung up the phone on us. And here they are still in a box. They're still confused, even with the Supreme Court decision, saying, well, we think we've addressed it, but we haven't. It's pretty sad. Kelly, thank you for being with us. Kelly Shackelford of First Liberty Institute, a nonprofit legal a law firm that allows people with courage and no money to have a chance at the Supreme Court. And we opened this up, folks, with the stats, and we'll close it with the stats. You've had 11 cases before the Supreme Court in the last 8 years, and you are 11-0. Kelly, thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
I will have Kelly Shackelford back for another episode to discuss the Constitution and what it says about your rights. Please spread the word on the Lieutenant Dan podcast and subscribe to our channel so you get updates on our latest episodes. One thing I'll promise is we'll have the most interesting guest you can hear on any podcast. Lieutenant Dan is available wherever you get your podcast. I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining the Lieutenant Dan podcast, and God bless.